What's up, metalheads? Here we go. Well, this time around, I'm gonna do something a bit different. Um, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was just a metalhead basically. I really loved Maiden and Megadeth and Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and stuff like that. I didn't really care for any older stuff. Uh, I must admit, still to this day, I'm not a terribly huge fan of these old bands from the 50s and 60s, but I guess I'm getting old and I feel the need to kind of figure out where everything goes, like in the history wise. Oh, I actually like making these lists, which are pretty much just based on my personal record collection. Um, so, for instance, if I don't care about Guns N' Roses, like I don't really worry about where they go in the history of metal. That doesn't really interest me at all. Uh, but there are some kind of interesting bands in the 50s and 60s, and it's not only what these bands did at the time, but also about their influence on more modern bands, how they influence bands like Kiss, for instance, or Judas Priest, or all these other bands. So this time around, I'm gonna go through my very small collection of music that predates the first two Black Sabbath albums. Basically, the way I see how metal developed from rock music and kind of heavy rock music uh, is that the first two Black Sabbath albums are the where heavy metal or doom metal uh, was born. So this time around, we're gonna check out some of the bands that I have from some earlier time than that. So, where I want to start with is this silly collection I made myself. I usually don't want to make collections. I have this firm belief that if a band is unable to make a complete album that I'm interested in, I shouldn't really worry about that band. I mean, you can make one great song here and there, but that's not enough. I need to have a whole complete album that I really like in order to be included in my collection. But when we get to the early days of rock music, it's really difficult because they didn't really consider albums as such. They did have LPs, I think starting from 1948. The first LPs were released. But they were more like collection of singles, really. They didn't consider as much the fact that someone would actually listen through the whole thing from start to finish. So that's why I gave up a little bit and figured out I'm gonna make myself a nice little collection from the early years. So this covers from the first top one hit single, rock single in the United States. It's from 1954 and it's Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets. Then there's some Little Richard, Tutti Frutti from 1955, Screaming Jay Hawkins, I Put a Spell on You from 1956, Elvis Presley, you kind of have to mention him, Jailhouse Rock from 1957, Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good from 1958, Link Ray, Rawhide, playing this instrumental song that has nothing to do with that more, I guess nowadays more famous Rawhide that Dead Kennedys covered on their album. That's from 1959. And then there's Barrett Strong, Money, That's What I Want, from 1960. Del Shannon's Runaway from 1961. Dick Dale and the Deltones playing Miserlou, which you probably have heard in the beginning of Pulp Fiction, that instrumental guitar track. 1962. The Thrashmen, Surfing Bird from 1963, which I guess most people are pretty familiar also. And The Animals from 1964, The House of the Rising Sun. These are some of the very early rock tracks that for me personally represent something of the energy and speed and I guess sometimes also the weirdness and experimentation, like with Screaming Jay Hawkins, those horror screams that later influenced bands like Alice Cooper and Kiss and stuff like that. Shock rock or kind of that heavier variety of glam rock, if you will. But this is for me kind of personal to have that, and important to have that connection with the very early days of rock music, because that's not really a million miles away from all the metal stuff that later came on. The roots are here. I'm not saying these are all brilliant songs, but they're historically really important and influenced a lot of these people. Then let's go on with the actual albums. So, where I'm gonna start with the first actual album that kind of works for me as a complete album is the Beatles, Rubber Soul. This is from 1965. It has lots of really cool tracks. I guess In My Life would be the most famous. I like Drive My Car, You Won't See Me, Think For Yourself. Lots of cool stuff here. I'm not saying it's a perfect album, but I think it's a really enjoyable album. And you can clearly hear how they were building like this cohesive album. This might be one of the earliest examples for me personally, of doing that sort of thing. And then in 1966, Beatles Revolver. And I think this is even better than Rubber Soul. For the longest time, this was the earliest album that I had. I think this is pretty much perfect from start to finish, considering when it was released. It's not overly heavy. Most of this stuff wouldn't be really considered that heavy stuff nowadays. But melodically, I think it's well done. I think it's the best album the Beatles ever did. So I'm gonna go with that one. And then there's the very famous Sgt. Pepper. I really, really love A Day in the Life. This is one of those weird albums where it almost seems like a one really, really brilliant song almost brings the whole album to life, especially when it's the last one. So you kind of, when you listen through the album, you're in anticipation of that one really, really great track. But there's lots of songs to love here. I think this has often been voted as one of the most successful and excellent albums in the whole century, from 1900 to 2000. So there you go. And then I'm gonna skip a couple of albums that I'm not a huge fan of, but here's Abbey Road. So these are the 4 picks I would get from the Beatles. My top 3, I guess, would be Revolver as the best one. Abbey Road is certainly the second best. Then I guess I would go with Rubber Soul next and Sgt. Pepper as my number 4. So this is like the British side of things. And there are 3 other bands, like the Kinks. Unfortunately, once again, I was unable to find a complete album that I would have fallen in love with, so I got this Japanese collection instead. It has all the songs I mostly like about the Kinks, all the big hits. You Really Got Me, All Day and All of the Nights, Tired of Waiting for You, or So Tired, I can't remember. I guess it's Tired of Waiting, yeah. Set Me Free, Till the End of Day, Sunny Afternoon, Waterloo Sunset. It starts to get more melodic and kind of, I guess, slightly like proto-proggy, maybe you could call it. There's some cool stuff here. Victoria, I think it's a catchy song. Lola is a fun one. Yeah, so I managed to find a collection in this case that actually has all the songs I like from a specific band. And then, very underrated band, The Who. Here's Tommy. And it does include also the live version, which is pretty cool. This is an album I've known about for the longest time, even back in the day, and all the cover artwork. Even when I wasn't that much into 60s music, it's an album I managed to hear a lot at home. Thanks, Mom. So there you go. But actually, it has opened up to me, especially the live version. And if you get this 2 CD version of Live at Leeds, you kind of get the almost whole album pretty much, Tommy, on the second disc. The first disc is kind of like this heavier, harder hitting rock. You get Summertime Blues and Young Man Blues, stuff like that, those cover tracks. Shaking All Over, I think, is another cover track. But then also their big hits. And I think The Who is way better live, absolutely. I would kind of, well, it's kind of mean to say, I would skip the studio albums and go straight to the live ones. But almost. I feel that their energy is really brought forth there, so I can really feel the influence that they gave to harder rock bands and even metal bands with their live attitude. And here's a collection. I don't usually like collections that much, but with some of these old bands, I've kind of given up on that. I'm kind of accepting. Fine, okay. And then one more. 1 year before Black Sabbath, 1969, a huge year for Led Zeppelin. Here's their first album, and here's Led Zeppelin 2, and I think Led Zeppelin 2 is probably even better than the first one. And these pretty much would be my favorite bands of the late 60s, but there are also some pretty cool American bands. So let's check those. First thing, of course, Jimi Hendrix. Now you could argue that this could be a British band. I could kind of consider them either way. I just went with the fact that Jimi Hendrix was born in Seattle, so I think he's an American guitarist, so let's go with that one. Oh, it has fallen off one of these discs. Here's the DVD. That I think there's a short documentary about him making this album. I think Eddie Kramer was involved with that documentary, so that's pretty cool addition. And then there's the album. That's great stuff. I actually have the American version of this one. I really like this track listing better, with starting with Purple Haze. And Foxy Lady is still listed. It's track number 10. I'm not a huge fan of the blues track Red House, for instance. So I think this American track list works better for me. I personally prefer it, even though the British version was released before that one. Here's my second favorite Jimi Hendrix album, Axis Bold as Love. I really, really like this one. This is also the special version with the DVD also included here, which is nice. Not essential by any means, but it's nice. I think this one is actually my favorite album. And yes, I know this wasn't really released in this form until, I guess, 2010. But I really like it. I mean, all the songs. Freedom, Isabella, Room Full of Mirrors, Dolly Dagger, Easy Rider, Drifting, all of these songs, in From the Storm. Astro Man is a fun one. Belly Button Window is a little, I guess, almost like a joke track at the end. I think this is really, really great and a very, very cool collection of the songs. Or not really a collection, but like an album full of songs. I think this is the best Jimi Hendrix album, even though, yeah, the song material is from 1969 and 1970, I think. That same year that Jimi Hendrix passed away. But it wasn't put together in that form before 2010. But it's still great. It's my favorite Jimi Hendrix album. Then CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival. This is a very stupid collection, I admit. It's 3 CDs and it kind of almost includes all CCR songs. But for all intents and purposes, it includes all those songs that I like the best. It also includes some other tracks that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's nice to have so many of them. I just kind of wish they were in the right order, because it's kind of silly jumping from Pendulum suddenly to the first or second album. But because CCR they released all their albums in such a short time, in just a span of a couple of years. I think this one works really nicely, even as a collection, and it takes very little space from my CD shelf. So I could have almost like have the whole a whole, what is that, 6 or 7 albums? I think it's like 7 albums, 7 studio albums. And also to help with that, I think probably these live albums are the most interesting ones anyway. So I have here Live in Europe, and then I have here the concert. So these two albums kind of help each other along track list wise. Also, Live in Europe, I think Tom Fogerty wasn't in the band anymore. He wasn't involved with the band anymore. So they played as a 3-guy band basically, and they do one hell of a job. But it's still like just one guitar, so it's nice to listen to even some of the same songs played with as a 4-piece, and compare that to them playing 3-piece. So that's kind of interesting, and I enjoy that. The set lists are really good on both of these. I might actually slightly prefer the Live in Europe one, because I really like some of these songs from Pendulum, like Pagan Baby, and unfortunately they don't play the whole song, just a snippet of it, but they do play it. I think it's here on the closing track, Keep On Chuckling, where they play this longer improvisation thing. Also Ramble Tumble would have been nice to hear live. Unfortunately, I have never found it anywhere played live, which is a shame. Ramble Tumble and Pagan Baby are 2 of my favorite CCR tracks. Here's The Doors. Everyone's always talking about their first album, but for me this second one works better as a complete album. The first Doors album is absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but this just gets me excited. I really like Strange Days, People Are Strange. When the Music Is Over, I think is a cool closing track. But the ones in the middle are really the interesting ones, like I Can See Your Face in My Mind and Your Lost Little Girl, which is so utterly sad song. It really makes you sad when you listen to it. A very, very cool album, and kind of underrated. Everyone's always talking about the first Doors album, and I guess then the final album where Jim Morrison sang for the band. I can't remember the title of it right now, but those are usually discussed more. But Strange Days is my pick. And then, kind of a silly one, here's the Beach Boys with Smile. This was at the time when they were really trying to be like this psychedelic band, where they were rivaling the Beatles with their stuff. This wasn't released back in the day. I think it took all the way to 2010, roughly thereabouts, when they finally released this in its original form. They basically had pretty much all that stuff ready and waiting in the studio, but they could never kind of get it together the way they had planned. I guess that hit single, Good Vibrations, that's like one of the top moments that I really, really prefer from this album. But there are still lots of other cool songs like Surf's Up. I think that's an amazing song. And Heroes and Villains, I think is a pretty cool one. and then there's that the one with wind chimes, and then there's cool water, and then there's that demonic fire suite. I can't remember the name. Was it something like something about Timothy Leary, I think. The really cool fire things, and I think that I can't for the life of me remember his name, but the main composer in the Beach Boys, he was doing some drugs at the time, so when he was recording that fire suite, suddenly there were these weird fires happening all around him in the city he was recording, so he got so scared that it might have influenced someone. Or there's this myth that he got so scared that he didn't want to release the album because he thought it really had an effect on what was happening all around him. Very talented guy, very interesting and cool band. So there were 4 British bands and then 4 American bands from the 60s that I really like. I also have a couple of DVDs. I guess we can quickly check them out. Here's Jimi Hendrix live at Woodstock early in the morning because the whole festival was postponed. I think maybe he should have played a bit earlier, but that's fine. That's pretty cool. And then there's Blue Wild Angel. I think I prefer this one. It has, I think this one has a better track list. I personally prefer this one to the Woodstock one. And then there's something interesting from The Who. This one is amazing, definitely. If you like hard-hitting, pure 60s rock, get this one. This is really life-changing. Oh, it's from 1970, but it's basically still 60s stuff. The quality of it is surprisingly good, and the track list and everything is, and the band is in top form. Really, if you want to see a prime late 60s rock band doing a live show, go with Isle of Wight Festival, The Who. Here's an interesting document about The Who. The kids are alright. This is some kind of remastered edition where they have like I think the complete songs of a quick one while he's away, including the whole thing, and it's really interesting, and it really brings the band to life if you wanna get into The Who. And then there's a live show from Helsinki. I think this was recorded in 2007. Yep. And I was happy enough to see this show. So it has kind of like this personal value to me. Great live show, and even though the band is fairly old at this point, and some of the original members had already passed away a long time ago before this one, it's still a very cool personal show that's really fun to see from time to time. So that's all the early stuff I have, starting from 1954 up to 1969 or 1970 if you cut out some of that Jimi Hendrix stuff. And that's about it. See you on the next one.